Welcome to another Infinite Wave Productions podcast. We hope you enjoy the following material. Please feel free to pass it forward. Thank you again, and many blessings on your journey.
All right, we'll get started. Welcome to the talk today, which is 2020, Decade of Destiny. But 2020, more than that, is the year of decision. All right? I don't know how many in this room follow astrology, or they're just curious to find out what this is about. But I've been doing intuitive spiritual counseling, channeling since 1997, and astrology has been something I've always been fascinated with since then, and have then discovered that it's actually something I'm quite good at, and it's also fascinating as a tool for self-understanding and self-healing. So that's one of the main things I want to bring, is that astrology is a language for doing that, for self-investigation. It is not what some people think of as just purely a form of prediction, or that when somebody does your natal chart, you're going to hear all kinds of wonderful things about yourself and then go off and do your life and you'll forget all about it, which is what happens to most folks, all right? So my name's Isaac. I'm obviously not from Britain. I've lived over here since 2004 and also in the Republic of Ireland. And I just live up the road, not too far from here in Littleport. So I'm local, but I have clients and people I connect with from predominantly the United States, where I was working for 10 years, and then, of course, around the world, predominantly in Europe and sometimes in Asia. So thank you all for making the time to come today, because in about an hour's time, well, actually about 40 minutes, the thing I'm going to talk about today is happening. We reached the point that astrologers have been watching and looking at for 2.5 years, which is a Saturn-Pluto Ceres, which is an asteroid, Mercury, and Sun conjunction happening all within 20 to 22 degrees of the sign of Capricorn. And I'll explain, hopefully, and you'll understand, why this is significant at this time. So it's the year of decision, decade of destiny. And before I start, and to kind of take away some of what might seem to be, ooh, this is going to be interesting, or ooh, this might be bad, a little parable that goes back to ancient China. And it's called, We'll See. Once upon a time, there was a farmer in the central region of China. He didn't have a lot of money, and instead of a tractor, he used an old horse to plow his field. Of course, this supposedly took place before tractors, but never mind. One afternoon, while working in the field, the horse dropped dead. Everyone in the village said, "Oh, what a terrible thing to have that happen." The farmer said simply, "We'll see." He was so at peace and so calm that everyone in the village got together and, admiring his attitude, gave him a new horse as a gift. Everyone's reaction now was, "What a lucky man," and the farmer said, "We'll see." A couple of days later, the new horse jumped a fence and ran away. Everyone in the village shook their heads and said, "Oh, what a poor fellow." The farmer just smiled and said, "We'll see." Eventually, the horse found his way home, and everyone again said, "What a fortunate man." The farmer said, "We'll see." A year goes by, and the farmer's young boy went out riding one day on the horse and fell and broke his leg. Everyone in the village said, "Oh, what a shame for the poor boy." The farmer said, "We'll see." 2 years later, the army came into the village looking to draft conscripts for a war. When they saw that the farmer's son had a broken leg, they decided not to take him. Everyone said, "What a fortunate young man." The farmer smiled again and said, "We'll see." Moral of this story, there's no use in overreacting to events and circumstances in your everyday life. What looks like a setback may actually be a gift in disguise. And when our hearts are in the right place, all events and circumstances are gifts that we can learn valuable lessons from. As Fra Giovanni once said, everything we call a trial, a sorrow, or a duty, believe me, the gift is there and the wonder of an overshadowing presence. And so I want you to keep that in mind when you watch this, and when I present this. At the end of it, you'll go, we'll see. I have a quote here by Carl Jung, which you can't see, but had a big screen you could. Carl Jung is the father of modern psychology, and he was a student of Freud's. And he said, surprisingly, astrology is assured of recognition from psychology without further restrictions, because astrology represents the summation of all the psychological knowledge of antiquity. And this was the guy, this is what psychologists these days say astrology is just hokum, you know. But a lot of people don't realize 3 years ago the state of India declared Vedic astrology a science. So it is recognized in the Indian nation's academic circles that astrology, Vedic astrology, the originator to this astrology, is a science. What's on tap in this talk is what astrology is and isn't, learning from our past. 2020, is it a make or break year? What lies beyond 2020? Practical spirituality and deep ecology, and a question and answer time for you all. What astrology is and is not. First of all, it is a psychic and psychological science. It is a language form for understanding ourselves, the world we find ourselves in, and hopefully at some point will actually be instrumental in helping us find out where we came from, why we are here, and where we are headed. It is based in mathematics and astronomy, which leaves a lot of people cold because they think, oh God, it's so complicated, it's so dry. What do these charts mean? What do these glyphs mean? They don't mean anything to me. They don't talk to me. It is based in astronomy. The first astrological system was invented in, guess where? Babylon. The Persians were the ones who invented the first applied system of astrology. The Vedics, the originators of Hindu culture, were also actually older than the Persians, but they didn't apply it in the same way that the Persians did. In India today, if there's a newborn in the village, the first person that's called for after the midwife, when the birth is imminent, is the village astrologer, so that they can cast the chart for the child and find out if it's a girl, if she's going to have a good dowry, is she going to marry into a good family, if it's a boy, will he be successful in his career. This is what Indians used astrology for. They weren't used in the court or in the state. Persia, the Babylonian Empire, was the first time astrology was used in such a function to maintain the power of the ruling class. And so, you know, we know the story of Jesus and the three wise men. Well, they were astrologers, and they came from, guess where? Persia, in the vicinity of Babylon. So as mentioned before, it's primarily a system of self-knowledge. Once you know how to read the language, you get to understand it. Astrology does not rule your life or your character. It has nothing to do with compelling you to be a certain way. So when somebody looks at your chart, yeah, this is just who you are. Live with it. Astrology is an ongoing, evolving system. And so in that spirit, I would say astrology has to grow with the individual. From my esoteric experience, astrology is not something that happens out there to us here. Okay, it's not the planets, it's not the stars, it's not the sun rising and the moon setting. They are reflections of human consciousness. They are part of us. I think biochemists have discovered there are actually stuff in the human body that comes from deep space, that we're made of stardust. So guess what? Everything is somehow connected, and astrology in this solar system is what works as a method of language and understanding. It doesn't operate outside the orbit of Pluto. If there were no sun, none of this would exist. So it doesn't rule your life, your choices, or your character, and it is also a two-way mirror to understanding your past. That has been proven over and over again to me with the clients I've worked with worldwide for the last 15 years, is that there is enough information in the chart, if you know where to look and you've taken the time to study it, to find out where the person's incarnational past history is, what challenges and problems and opportunities and skills that they bring with them into this lifetime. And the only moment that that becomes active is the moment that that baby draws its first breath. Before that, it's neutral. It's totally neutral. But because you're here, because you drew that first breath, because before you were born you chose those parents, you chose the circumstances, then when you got here, you forgot it all. The chart is one way to start helping to remember it all. So when I refer to learning from our past, I mean collectively, as a species, and as our relationship with this planet and this Earth goes. And that's what the major outer planet transits show us. I first got convinced about the efficacy of astrology when I was sitting with an astrologer in Eugene, Oregon in 2001, in May, having lunch. Nice casual lunch. Wonderful, beautiful place. And in the middle of lunch, he just dropped this bombshell on me. He said, you know, I'm really concerned about the upcoming Saturn-Pluto opposition this August. Bush is either going to start a war or he's going to get pushed into one, or some secret cabal inside the government will make it happen. And I just looked at him and I went, Dale, what are you talking about? He says, I've been watching this coming for a year and I do not like it. That Saturn-Pluto opposition occurred on the 23rd of August, about the time George Bush was waving off any warnings about there being any kind of ability of anybody to bring down a building with an airplane. 3 weeks later, it happened. I sat up and took notice. And then I started looking backwards in time to see other events in history, going back to even the Roman Empire, and looking forward in time and saying, okay, maybe astrology can't tell us, predict and tell us exactly what event will happen when, but it will tell us to keep our eyes open because something is going to come. Something will happen that will wake people up, will get their attention, and change the direction or course of our collective experience. So that's what got me interested in taking astrology seriously. Not just because of what it did for me personally or what I thought it could do, but what I saw it manifesting like in the outer collective experience. So previous Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter stelliums. Now stellium means if there are 3 or more objects in the same sign of the zodiac, that's a stellium. Today we have 6 in about 40 minutes, 30 minutes. So the first one was the rise of Babylon that I mentioned earlier. 1894 before current era, or BC, was the establishment of the first Babylonian Empire under Hammurabi. And that's the last time we had Saturn, Pluto, the Sun, and Ceres and Mercury all aligned at 20 to 22 degrees of Capricorn. 4,000 years ago, kids. We're ending not just a 35-year cycle from the last Pluto-Saturn conjunction, but a 4,000-year one. That's why I'm sitting up and saying, hey, we've got to look at this. We might learn something. The next one was the rise of the Islamic Empire in 710 and 711 AD, or current era as they call it now. The Protestant Revolution in 1518. Martin Luther in October of 1517 nailed his 95 theses to the Wittenberg church door and declared Protestantism was now the new face of Christianity after years of papal rule. And then we have today, 2020. January 12th, 2020. Review, though, of the history, if you can't see, I'm sorry. Babylon. Hammurabi is probably less known to anybody that hasn't run across him in your textbook learning in school, but he was the first one who codified a system of law and legal principles for the ruling of Babylon and any of its acquisitions as an empire. And it would be amiss for us to think that that's just ancient history, because the codified rules and legal arguments in the Hammurabi Code exist within our Western legal systems even today. They were there long before the Magna Carta ever came into being. Okay? So a lot of what you find in legal circles, maritime law, all those were created by a guy named Hammurabi 4,000 years ago. So this was the Code of Hammurabi on this kind of like chiseled into a block of limestone or sandstone. And he was quite the warrior. The Babylonian Empire was the biggest empire of its kind up until that point in human history. It's spread over all the Middle East, into the Indus Valley of India, and all the way up into Turkey and into Greece. So he was quite ambitious. Holding Toledo. Toledo is the old capital of Spain before Madrid. And during that time, in early Roman Catholic times, if you will, the first 4 or 5 centuries, Toledo was actually run by the Visigoths. Now, the Visigoths were attributed to be one of the tribal conglomerates of Europe that caused the fall of the Roman Empire. And the Visigoths were the forerunners of what we call the modern Spanish state, or the Spanish people. So they had control over Spain, or the Iberian Peninsula, and then all of a sudden, in 710 AD, a guy named Tariq, with a large contingent of soldiers and merchants, and what do they call them? Imams, you know, the religious men, the holy men in Islam, jumped the Strait of Gibraltar. And by the way, Gibraltar is a Moorish name. It's a Muslim name. It's not an English name. Jumped the straits and made acquaintance with the early Spaniards, the Visigoths, and were invited to Toledo, where they had a kind of trade delegation and negotiations, and everything was going pretty good. And then Tariq went back across the Strait of Gibraltar and came back with a huge army. And that happened in less than 1 year. The fall of the Iberian Peninsula occurred, and the fall of Toledo, and the capital was then moved by the Moors to Madrid. So that all happened in a very, very short space of 1 year, because at that time, Saturn, Pluto, Ceres, Mercury were all conjunct in the late degrees, the exact same degrees as today, in the sign of Cancer. It's opposite from Capricorn, all right? Follow the patterns. Follow the patterns. They will always lead you to the truth. The Islam Empire at that time stretched, well, you can see it's off the map. It goes almost to Mongolia and all across North Africa. It was like a mirror image of the Roman Empire, but all on the southern side of the Mediterranean Sea. You can't see it up here, but this will all go on YouTube at one point in next week. Goes up and goes up into its highest extent in Western Europe was the Pyrenees, between France and Spain. So that's how far west it got. But it was way up into the Black Sea, Caspian Sea area, east to the Indus Valley. It was huge, and it just appeared out of nowhere in 200 years. And then, to bring it a little bit closer to home, I mentioned it earlier, this is the last time we had these two giants of the solar system opposing each other in the signs of Sagittarius and Gemini, was on September 11th, 2001. And we all know what happened then. So this is the chart. Now, if it was on a big screen, it might make sense for me to use the laser pointer and point out different things. But I'm going to describe it the best I can. The stellium is here. It's all clustered. This chart is for London, England, at 1503 today. And everything's clustered across that side of the chart, which is how it's experiencing or being experienced by the local population. But that's not so important. What's important is recognize what the archetypes mean here, just like going back to Carl Jung. Think of Saturn as your dad. Saturn's like, I'm in charge. You'll do as I say. Yes, you will be home at 10 o'clock, or I will be calling the cops. You will do your homework before you go out. You will have good habits, and if you don't do them, I will know the reason why. And so Saturn is really the symbol of the patriarchy. You know, we got to have a plan, and then we have to execute the plan. We've got to do it this way, and we've got to do it this way, because it's the way we've always done it, right? It's masculine. It's the lord of time. It's also the lord of contraction. Now, in Greek mythology, Saturn was a very nice guy. Anybody here know about the Spanish artist Goya? Anybody? Goya? He did a painting called Saturn Eating His Children. Okay? Huge mural. Hangs in Madrid. to this day. And Goya really envisioned or captured the essence of the Greek story of Saturn. He was a Titan, which means he was hidden in the earth. And he gave birth to a lot of progeny. And one of his children was Pluto. And one of his other children is Chiron. And one of his other children was Neptune, or otherwise known as Poseidon, king of the deep. Now, Saturn was a jealous king. In fact, you could probably find parallels to his personality in the Old Testament Christian Bible, you know, Yahweh, Jehovah. He wouldn't brook any other gods. No pretenders to his throne. So he eliminated any possibility of his own children overthrowing him by eating them. So that's why Pluto is considered the lord of the underworld, because he spent the longest time in Saturn's gut. And then he escaped. So the thing is, every one of these characters in Greek mythology, these gods and titans and everything, they had very much similar human characteristics as us, of like jealousy and contention and, you know, aggrandizement and all kinds of other things. But they also could be very loving and very helpful, like the goddess Hecate or Diana. You know, they're very looking much out for human beings and their welfare. Or Aphrodite, the goddess of love. But when we look at these archetypes, we have to pay attention to the message they have for our own psyche. So Saturn is the guy, symbolically, that is upholding the systems that exist right now in our society. Banking, politics, the economic systems, finance, social control, laws, everything having to do with organized, controlled behavior for a particular result, and usually for the benefit of a very small minority. All right? That's Saturn. It's the absolute crystallization, if you will. Today's form of capitalism is the absolute crystallization of city-state power that was first appearing at the end of the first agricultural age, when you had city-states, which pulled in all the harvest from all the areas and stored it in granaries, and then they had to have a standing army to protect it from the other guy. That is Saturn. Pluto, on the other hand, is the lord of death and the lord who taketh away, and so Pluto comes along and goes, "You've been sitting on that throne too long, Dad. You've become a little stuffy and a little overbearing, and it's time for me to change that." And so today, Pluto and Saturn are right next to each other, and they hate each other. The father, the overbearing dad, and Pluto comes along and says, this no longer stands, because the higher order of things says it can't. It no longer can survive, because it is no longer in service to the planet or to human evolution. So everything we see going on in Australia, Iran, Trump, all that stuff, is a manifestation of a sort of crumbling that's happening very, very, very quickly. Here's why. And this is one of the symbols of why. So we got this going on, and Ceres is added to it. Ceres is an asteroid goddess that has to do with hearth and home, baking the bread, keeping the fires going, and nurturing. And in her role here, she's a bit of a spoiler, because she's basically saying whatever replaces Saturn patriarchy has to have this nurturing component. It has to be looking after everybody equally. The Mercury is, we better think differently. Mercury is saying we have to think differently. We have to rethink our thinking. The sun is throwing a light on the whole thing. We just had an eclipse 2 days ago. It was also involved. Funny enough, the whole Iranian airliner thing going down, that was on the same day, being shot down apparently by its own forces. Now, the one thing that I haven't discussed yet or pointed out is that there's another element on this chart that isn't really readily identified by its glyph, and that is the miniature or dwarf planet Eris. Eris is represented by a little triangle up there near Uranus. And this is an interesting character. Eris is, in Greek mythology, a goddess who is representing discord and also that which needs to be revealed, or the truth that has been denied. Truth that has been denied. And Eris is at 23 degrees Aries, so therefore it is a perfect candidate for the squaring to the Pluto-Saturn conjunction, also Mercury specifically. And it is very strongly positioned in this situation because of the type of archetype it is. And it is discord, is a revealing of that which has been denied, truth that has been denied. And in Greek mythology, Eris had the job of disrupting the wedding celebrations for Helen of Troy on Mount Olympus. Essentially, as the mythology goes, she was disinvited or not invited to the celebration, to the wedding nuptials. And so here's what happened. She showed up anyway. She was the first wedding crasher in human mythology. And she showed up with a golden apple, a real gold apple, inscribed with the words, "To the fairest." And she made a grand entrance, placed this apple on a marble podium, and looked around the festivities, and everybody's eyes were on her, of course, especially the other women goddesses, the goddesses that were there, the other women. And she didn't say a word, apparently, and just walked off. And so the fight began for all of the goddesses, and to say, okay, well, you know, who is the fairest, you know? So this is where the Grimm's fairy tale reference comes from, mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? And so they've definitely studied mythology. And what happened was that Helen of Troy ended up receiving, upon command of Zeus, the trophy of this apple, this golden apple. The upshot of which was, of course, she was abducted, kidnapped, or a willing kidnapped victim of Paris of Troy. And anyway, you know the rest. The Trojan War began, lasted 10 years, ended in tears for everybody. So she is definitely strongly configured in this chart and not to be overlooked or lightly mentioned. She will also be strongly configured with Pluto for the rest of the year, when Pluto is hanging around 23, 24 degrees of Capricorn, mostly in this year, most of the time this year, we're either direct or retrograde. Eris will be right there stirring the pot along with Pluto and saying transformation must happen. The truth that has been denied must be revealed. Discord may be the only weapon that I have to be able to get people's attention. All right, so there is that piece. Moving on to the next piece is, what is the timeline this year? Basically, we have had the annular lunar eclipse in Cancer. The sun was at 22 Capricorn, very close to where Saturn and Pluto are. The moon was at 22 Cancer. This was quite a huge release point, this annular lunar eclipse, very strong. It was when, just around the time when the Iranian airliner went down. And apparently, as I mentioned, it was shot down by its own Revolutionary Guard forces in error. Today we have, January 12th, the Pluto-Saturn Sun Ceres, Mercury, all conjunct at 21 to 23 Capricorn. Now Ceres I hadn't quite brought totally into the picture, but basically she is another Roman goddess, the one of wheat and the hearth. She bakes the bread, she looks after the kids, she keeps the fires going. She was considered quite a protectorate of the home and family traditions, and that which she's very nurturing. All right, she's kind of like Cancerian. She's very nurturing and very much the mother archetype. And with her in the mix here, it's basically saying, okay, we have to reorient ourselves to the bountiful riches of the earth and of the harvest, and become more aligned with our sort of natural and pagan heritage that we have moved away from, or been taken away from by the industrial age and technology, and even from agriculture. Ceres wasn't I mean, from the Roman standpoint, she was a god of agriculture, goddess of agriculture, but she was, in the pagan realm, would probably be configured to be someone who was always going to give a blessing for bountiful hunting and foraging, that kind of thing. So getting back to our roots, getting back into alignment with the principles of nature is what I think this is saying in here. Okay, so Uranus, the sky god, turned direct in the sign of Taurus within hours after the conjunction, stationed direct about a day or so before. And some astrologers, including myself, are keeping a wary eye on Uranus and Taurus. Taurus represents monetary values, homes, real estate, agriculture, food production, food distribution, sensuality and sexuality, certainly, and in that sense it's about relationships. But it's also about being a trickster. You know, Uranus is a thief. He stole fire from the gods and gave it to human beings. But he is a bit of a thief in other regards. He usually comes along and is a thief of peace and stability when least expected. A good example of Uranus doing that is in 2011 when Japan experienced that dreadful undersea earthquake followed by a tsunami, which killed tens of thousands. And then a couple of days later, Uranus moved from the last minutes of the last degree of Pisces, where it was during the earthquake and tsunami. Pisces, water, Neptune, you can make the correlations right there. And a few days later, it moved into 0 degrees of Aries, which is cardinal fire. And that triggered or signaled, more accurately, the beginnings of the problems at the Fukushima nuclear facility, with the cooling systems being down and the reactors starting to run into critical states of reaction, nuclear fission, and starting to create all sorts of problems, which carried on for the next few weeks, as we all know, and still carry on being a problem to this day. So Uranus and Taurus is also, because Taurus being an Earth sign, very strongly identified with Earth and with the planet Venus, also very strongly related to geological and maybe even meteorological upsets or surprises. So watch what happens geologically this weekend, today, and over the next 24, 48 hours, with it having gone direct, and see what occurs. Check the headlines, see if there's anything going on in the financial markets, see if there's anything going on in geological events around the globe. So there you go. The one thing about Uranus is, because Taurus rules money and monetary financial systems, look for some sort of surprising upticks in digital banking, cryptocurrency, or downticks. I mean, it can go either way with Uranus. It just depends on what's aspecting it, what it's aspecting, what relationships it has with other energies. And the other thing is here, theft. Okay, so digital theft, banking systems being hacked, accounts being hacked. Don't put all your eggs in one basket is my advice. Diversify as much as possible to protect your assets. And assets is another thing. So, you know, gold comes out of the ground. Silver comes out of the ground, precious metals. This may be a year to consider turning your focus more toward those things which have historically been of higher value and hold their value better than fiat currencies that the banks print or create on a computer screen, which have no backing whatsoever in anything in the real world. So you have been warned. There we go. The next thing I'd like to mention is that very quickly we have 3 different transits occurring for the balance of the year, all involving Pluto and Jupiter, and then Saturn and Jupiter. Pluto and Jupiter, this should be kind of actually good, because Jupiter is a benefic. It gives blessings and throws its blessings ahead of itself. Even in Capricorn, it's somewhat hampered, but it is still better to have Jupiter in Capricorn than to have, say, Saturn or Pluto there, for example, like we do right now. But there are lessons involved here, and Jupiter is going to make sure that the Pluto lessons get learned and that there is some sort of equilibrium here. All right, so we've got Pluto and Jupiter conjunct for the first time exactly in April 5th. Then they're retrograde exact on June 30th, my birthday. And on December 21st, Saturn and Jupiter move together out of the sign of Capricorn and into 0 degrees Aquarius. Now, this is very cool because Pluto will follow into Aquarius in 2023-24. And then you'll have these 3 planets all together in Aquarius. To me, this may be the sort of outlying moments in which we enter the age of Aquarius. We're not quite there yet. There's, between the ending of one great cycle or age and another one, there's about a 400 to 500 year overlap between the two. We're about 180 years away for when we are going to progress fully into the next 2160-year cycle, according to the precession of the equinoxes, which will be the sign of Aquarius. But in the meantime, we get these little tasters, these little appetizers along the way, and this is certainly one of them. One thing I've discovered that is very interesting to point out is that major teachers or leaders sometimes pass away at Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions. The most recent one, which happened in December when Saturn and Jupiter conjuncted for the first time in Capricorn in recent times, was when Ram Dass, aka Richard Alpert, passed away. And so we're coming up on another Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, this time at 0 degrees of Aquarius on December 21st, which is the winter solstice. So watch the headlines. This could affect somebody who's a leader, whether they're spiritual, whether they're political, depends. But somebody who's progressive, if they are political, not hoping for a death. Let's hope everybody stays healthy and doesn't transition ahead of their time. Okay, so that's the lineup for this year. And you might wonder, okay, well, what happens with the UK? The UK is got a very interesting chart. This is the chart that's usually considered for the Great Union, or Great Britain, which is Scotland, England, Wales, and the Republic of Ireland, which didn't have Northern Ireland at that time. It wasn't even a republic. It was just Ireland, or Erie, together for the first time as Great Britain, or the United Kingdom. So in this chart, the United Kingdom's chart, the sun is at 18 degrees Capricorn and the moon is at 25. So obviously this whole stellium in Capricorn is affecting the mood of the country, the moon in the 4th house, our family, our traditions, our connections to our roots. And I think this cycle has shown the divisions, the clashes within the family, i.e. the social fabric of this nation, of the UK. Brexit has certainly been a factor in that. So I feel that this is very strongly representing what happened when Pluto was conjunct the UK sun, which was around the time Brexit occurred. So we see that connection, right? And right now it's having its solar return. It just had it's coming up to it. Yeah, it just had its solar return with Sun conjunct Sun. And now we have this whole stellium in Capricorn opposing the nation's natal moon, or the federation, if you will. It's like a federation or confederation of states, 4 states, and when I include Northern Ireland in the modern UK, and exclude the Republic of Ireland. So here we go. We don't know which way it's going to go. We have a whole year now of Pluto opposing this moon. We'll see what happens by the time December rolls around and see where Brexit is at. Then we have the US, the last empire. Yeah, Pluto returns typically announce the end of a major cycle for a country or a nation, and this is coming up to one of them. Pluto return happens for the United States in 2022, which means that this is a full revolution of Pluto from the place it was at by degree and minute in the US chart, and that was, there it is, 27 degrees Capricorn in 1776, and full revolution of Pluto's gone around the sun, come back home to roost. The chickens are coming home to roost at last in the empire, and it's not going to ever be the same as it was. What it's going to be, I'm not sure. but we definitely are seeing the stresses involved sociologically, economically, politically in the United States right now with all of this happening. And there's more to come. So Pluto won't reach that exact degree for another year and a half past the time of the election. Beyond 2020, we have the USA Pluto return, which I have mentioned. Saturn enters Pisces on November 4th. It has gone through Saturn really quick. Saturn through Aquarius really quick. And then Pluto enters Aquarius November 20th, about a little over a year later, finally. And then Neptune enters Aries in 2026, 2 years later, after it's done with Pisces. It's been in Pisces a long time. Uranus leaves Taurus and enters Gemini on February 8th, 2027. So it's a very powerfully configured decade all the way around. How does all this affect you? It depends. If, you have to consider yourself human, you're part of the collective consciousness of humanity, as Carl Jung would put it. If you have in your natal chart transiting planets involved in your own birth blueprint, then you'll feel these things more personally, more upfront and in your face. So realize there is a purpose for that, and you might want to consult with a competent astrologer, such as yours truly, in order to find out what that purpose or what the meaning of these transits and these changes might be for you. All right? More on that a little bit later. All existing systems of governance, economics, politics, religion, social cohesion, all these structures are under pressure right now, and we see it all around us. It's been going on for a bit, especially since Pluto entered Capricorn in 2008 with the beginning of the housing crisis, the credit crunch, the failure of Wall Street banking, investment banks, and so forth. And the message here from Pluto and Capricorn is evolve or perish. All right, and basically we're faced as a planet, as a global family with this situation. It's not just us, it's the animals, the insects, the ecosystem. So this isn't a prediction as I stay here. We are watching it happen, and we are part of it happening. The planet desperately needs you to no longer be hampered or restricted or held back by personal or ancestral issues, all right? So the world needs your new and bold actions and ideas. So perhaps you are somebody who is going to be directly or indirectly involved in the big changes over the next decade. One of the things that's important to remember, you might not be called to a big outer role, but by working on yourself or by raising your vibration or by being more kind towards others, you can actually be affecting the overall experience of everybody else. So you don't have to be like a big cheese, important, famous person to do that. You can do that just by your vibration, your energy, your love. So what are we going to need most to get through the next decade? A sort of practical spirituality instead of what we would consider our traditional religions. Practical spirituality means more interest in personal growth, personal sciences, meditation, diet, new healing modalities and technologies, exercise, not for the sake of, muscle building maybe, but just naturally get fit, can commune with nature, new hobbies, new vocations and avocations. How about cooperative community building? What most research shows is that small groups fare better. So if you're thinking you're going to try to put together a huge intentional community with 1,000 people and live off the land, good luck. It's not going to work. You're going to end up having a hierarchy. You're going to have to create a new political hierarchy, a new administrative hierarchy, and so forth. And that is not where we need to go. We need to go to smaller groups, working and cooperating, group to group, individual to individual, for the benefit of all. Some of this may include learning permaculture and gardening skills that will be sustainable, learning how to do some basic foraging, knowing how to look after yourself in the event of, who knows, food shortages, power interruptions, etc. The unexpected. Remember Uranus and Taurus. Speaking of which, tech in service to human requirements, innovations in food production and distribution, which are represented by Uranus and Taurus. I think we're going to see a different kind of revolution regarding digital technologies. Right now, there's a lot of pushback against 5G. I don't see that lessening with Uranus and Taurus. I think it's going to only increase because Uranus is going to create, I think, a greater awareness of how we are affected by artificial electromagnetic fields and how vulnerable our artificial electronic net is to geological upheavals, meteorological upheavals, solar upheavals, and so forth. The other thing here is on the bright side, it could be the harbinger of something new and different in food distribution, food production, first of all, and food distribution. Case in point, watched a show the other night with George Monbiot from The Guardian. He's an environmental journalist. And it's called Apocalypse Cow. And what was really great about that show, and you can find it on Channel 4 if you're here in the UK, and 4 on demand. Recommend watching it if you can stand the commercials, but definitely recommend watching it. The interesting thing about the show is that they actually are at the cutting edge right now of developing food in a laboratory that isn't chemically based. It's coming from stem cell research and creating growing hamburger, growing steaks that actually are real, but they do not involve animal agriculture. All right, that's amazing. Showed him right on the TV show eating pancakes made in a lab in Finland, I think it was Finland, where he could actually eat them and say, hey, this tastes just like real pancakes. And it's grown from real biological cultures. All right, so this is amazing stuff. It's like space age, science fiction. And I think that's definitely showing the touch of Uranus in the sign of Taurus right now. Cultivating the mysteries. Neo-pagan is the only thing I could come up with, even though that's not really accurate. I think we're having to go back to before the rise of salvationist-based religions to find what our roots were in terms of the nature religions and how we interacted with nature in a very sacred and reverent way. That's non-dualistic, not see ourselves as above or separate from the environment or creation, and seeing ourselves more as an intrinsic part of it. Not only that, sort of a child or a expression of it. So that's something that I think we're going to see more of over the next decade as a reaction to, or as a pushback against capitalism and, how should we say, predator capitalism, surveillance capitalism in the form of technology, and predator capitalism in the form of fossil fuel and other industries that are definitely high polluting. Revolution in human relationship models. I don't have much to say about this, but you know, the divorce rates being so high and new books and research coming out that says, well, maybe we aren't as monogamous as we thought we were, and maybe a lot of the stuff around marriage isn't what we crack it up to be and romanticize it to be. So I think you're going to see a revolution in relationship models over the next decade, probably pretty intense in all directions. We'll see what happens because with Uranus involved in Taurus, I have no idea. You cannot predict Uranian influences. So there you go. The end of real-world capitalism, as we have known it. As we have known it, I think capitalism, or some form of barter and exchange based on that production of goods and services, will exist probably for another 30 or 40 years. But I think it's going to have to give way if we are going to survive, if the planet is going to survive. Capitalism is now reaching the end of its useful cycle. In fact, it's already reached that end. We just haven't admitted to it yet. Okay, so these are the things I feel that are important to at least consider, investigate, and open your mind so that you are not locked into mindsets, beliefs, and so forth that you inherited from your generation or from the generations prior to your being here, and that you can open your mind to receiving new downloads, if you will, new inspirations, new aha moments that will actually help us to transition as a species and help all other species survive, but help us to transition as a species from being in a competitive mode to one of cooperation, to sharing, to egalitarianism, to recognizing the value of each individual, but also the value of entire ecosystems and biological life forms or families. So that's basically, the focus here that I think we need to consciously choose. That deep ecology part is really essential if we're going to come into an understanding that we're part, not separate, but part of this entire living organism that we call Gaia or planet Earth. All right, well, there was a question and answer time in the original live broadcast, and that had some really great questions. And we also had a meditation, which unfortunately didn't get captured on the original recording. A meditation to send out blessings of love and everything like that to other people and to the planet and to all life forms, especially like Australia, which has lost such biodiversity and such large numbers of wildlife and plant life. So anyway, the last thing I want to mention is that I'm offering to you, the listener and the watcher, to the end of July, until the end of January. It's been a long week since Sunday. The end of January, a astrological transit reading or session that will really focus on how these changes or these transits for 2020 dovetail with your chart, work with your astrology, work with your blueprint. And it is a starting point. It's a diagnostic point. It's great as a diagnostic tool to help you see where you need to focus your consciousness and your energies more, and also to be aware of any kind of challenges or pitfalls coming up during the year. So if that is of interest for you, then please get in touch with me at the phone number or the email address that you see below on the bottom of this slide. And I will look forward to hearing from you. And please leave your comments. And if you like what you hear and you like what you see, then please subscribe to my channel on YouTube. All right? Thank you so much. And thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you have some more updates as they happen. And take care and all the best and blessings on your journey in 2020 and beyond. Thank you for tuning in to today's presentation. If you'd like to know more about Isaac and his work, you can go to www.isaacgeorge.com and contact him through isaac@isaacgeorge.com. Many blessings on your journey.